We're in the middle of the summer garden season and we already know that it's about to go down with those vine squash borers. If you know anything about them, if you're growing squash, or maybe you have had some unfortunate encounters with that vine squash borer, you already know that they are a menace to our squash plants. I've done a few videos on emergency care and some preventative care for the vine squash borer, but in this video, I'm combining them all together, plus an additional few tips and tricks on preventative care also, just so we do not have to lead or result to that emergency care, because boy, emergency surgery on a squash plant, oof, that's a little on the rough side. Let's go. What's going on, my plant peoples? I am the ADHD gardener, where I use gardening, houseplants, and humor as a much needed form of mental health therapy, sobriety, and also learning how to navigate this crazy ass world with ADHD, using our garden as a therapy tool. And vine squash borers are my enemy, my numero uno enemy in my garden. Now, those actually come, I've touched a lot on this information on my other previous videos, but I'm combining them all together. The vine squash borer comes from a moth. I think it comes from the Clearwing, clear something. I'm gonna put it right up there. That moth, oh, it is the bane of our existence. Those little suckers are going to be mating in mid-June all the way till July. And what they do, they're gonna drop them eggs, and they're gonna drop them at the eggs at the base of your plants, your squash plants, the base. And on top of that, which sucks even more, is that those little suckers go in the soil around your squash plants, and then they come back up next year, and then they're gonna just attack those squash plants. Yo, no lie, I see right now, I think there's a bunch of eggs on the bottom of the leaves, which leads me to the next one. Please pay attention to your plants. I can't stress this enough, ADHD people, neurodivergence, neurospices. You cannot forget about them. And I know you have object permanence or problems with object permanence, because I know I do. If I walk away from the garden, I completely forget about these squash, and you can't do that. You got to give yourself reminders. Write it down on the wall, put it on your calendar, set yourself alarms, something to come back every single day and inspect your plants. Because if you can catch those little stinking eggs underneath the leaves, then you can kill them before they even hatch. So I just found them, and I'm going to show you what they look like. A lot of this is manual inspection, manual labor. You're going to go in here and you're going to manually turn over your leaves and look for a bunch of little eggs or dots that are kind of like in a linear fashion. Not all of them are going to be very linear. It could be all just spaced out, but they're going to be clumped up in one large area. And you're going to get rid of the entire leaf, and then you're going to spray. This is why I always said, even in the other video, I said, you know what, let's put a row cover on your plants. I found a little bit of a problem when it comes to those row covers. And eventually they got to come out of those, out of the net. And on top of that, in order for proper propagation, you're going to need to take that net covering off. One, the mesh covering works up to an extent. It's not 100% foolproof. So when I be hearing other people say that, oh, it works so well, almost 100%, I don't see that happening. And I'm gonna tell you why. One, if you have to put the netting on properly. You cannot let no gaps in that row cover. The second problem I found is these vine squash, these squash vine. What they're gonna do, they can't stay in the row cover forever, so they're gonna vine out of the row cover, which inevitably is going to expose the plants to those moths. The third problem with the netting is if you plant those squash in the same spot as last year, those little sucker vine borers, following year, they come up from the ground and eat whatever plant is right there. And if you're growing squash in the same area as last year, that row cover isn't going to do squat doodles for you, because they're coming up from the ground. And on top of that, they're being caged in by the row cover. So that is a major no-no. So the row cover helps, but only up to a certain extent. In the previous videos, I talked about BT, which is that injectable solution that we've been putting in our plants. And that actually works. But the BT, you have to keep repeatedly having to inject your plants. I think it was like every few days to a week that you have to keep repeating to do that. I have found another different alternative solution that you can still inject in your plants, but last a lot longer. It's said to last at least 3 to 4 weeks. So you already know I'm going to be using that. Remember, I did mention BT. Now, BT is Bacillus thuringiensis. It's a big word. It's just a bacteria that will kill those vine squash borers, along with a bunch of other bad bugs too. Now that BT is awesome because I showed you how to inject it from the last previous video. However, I missed a few gaps on explaining a few things. The first one was that when it comes to the needle that you're using, it doesn't really matter. You want to ideally use like about a 2 ml needle. You can buy this off of Amazon, no problem. But you really want to just inject about 1 to 1.5 mLs of whatever BT solution that you're going to be using into the plant. Another thing is, when you are injecting this, you have to make sure that you're injecting into a hollow part of the stem. If a squash plant is not mature enough, then that means that you're not going to be able to penetrate the vine and inject the solution. I don't remember if I mentioned that in the other video, but now you know. Okay, so you want to go for the thicker stems, the ones that are a little more hollow. And you're just going to have to play with it. It's a trial and error, people, okay? You're not going to get on the first try, but if you do, kudos to you. But I had to keep trying. Sometimes you have to go in and pull back a little bit. And this kind of reminds me of nursing, to be honest. So, and for these new preventative measures, let's start with the first one. The first one is other plants, trap crops. Now, I don't have a trap crop here, but one trap crop that you could use is another fellow squash. I believe it is called the Hubbard Blue squash. It's a type of squash. In other words, you need a sacrificial plant. Okay, so that one sacrificial plant, all the bugs are going to be going to that one plant and leaving these plants alone. Now, if you have that trap crop, or you have one of these squashes that you are willing to just let it die for the sake of saving your other plants, then that's cool. Let's say you don't have a trap crop and it's all good because we can do some type of plants that deter a lot of those vine squash borer bugs. And I have a few of them here that I'm going to show you. Now, if you see right behind me, I have a marigold plant. Marigolds have a very, very potent smell, especially a gust of wind or you touch a little bit of it, that marigold smell is just very, very strong. And that's what those vine borers do not like to smell at all. Another plant that they do not like the smell of is anything in the onions family. So if you have onions, scallions, chives, those would work. I would concentrate more on the onions though, because they hate that. So I have a bunch of onions growing in containers. I brought those containers right over here and I've planted, well, I left the container right around the entire squash area. So I covered the perimeter with a bunch of plants that are heavy smelling that will hopefully deter the bugs. Ideally, you would want to plant these in the ground, but considering the fact that I'm a little late on that, at least I have the containers. So I'm hoping that will do something, but I think it may work better if you were growing those plants in the ground directly. Remember when I was talking about those vine squash borer suckers that go burrow into your soil and then like stay there dormant, and then in the next year they come up from the ground to lay their eggs and all that crap? Well, I have another preventative solution for that. However, it is kind of a good and a bad thing. It is called diatomaceous earth. Diatomaceous earth is a powder which is super awesome because it kills a lot of bugs. The only problem is it's indiscriminatory, which means it'll kill the good and the bad bugs. So if you have good bugs like ladybugs, lacewings, and other beneficial, insects, it'll kill those too. So you have to be very, very careful where you put the diatomaceous earth. I put them on top of the leaves and I cover the soil. I straight up cover all of the soil surrounding in the area. Remember those little squash vine borer suckers coming up from the soil to go lay their eggs? They're going to come up from the soil all right, but they're going to be coming up into the diatomaceous earth powder, which will eventually kill them. I am hoping that would work. I avoid using that powder on the flowers because remember, you want the beneficial pollinators. So if you're putting that diatomaceous earth on the flowers, you're gonna kill the good bugs. Spray with BT. But that leads me into the next one, is that I've learned of another solution aside from BT that you can totally inject into your squash plants. And that solution is called spinosad. Spinosad is an awesome other type of a solution that you can use for those plants. And you know what we're going to do? We are going to be injecting them as well. Remember I mentioned about the injections? Remember I mentioned about those size needles and everything? Well, we're going to be using that spinosad instead of the BT this year. And the reason why is because the BT only lasts for about like a few days to a week, versus the spinosad has been said to work between 3 and 4 weeks. So that means we don't have to come out here every single week to do this if we don't want to. You are still coming out here to protect your plants, to pay attention, to inspect, and all that stuff. But maybe you don't necessarily have to be injecting them. I'm going to be injecting them this time around again, but I know that means I only have to come back here in a few more weeks to inject this again, so it's all good. Let me know down in the comments below, have you been successful when it comes to your your squash plants? Have you ever even encountered a vine squash borer? Because I guess depending on your state or where your climate is, you may not encounter the vine squash borer, but you may encounter something else. So what is that other bug that you're going for? I really hope you enjoyed this video and you got some good information out of it. Yes, I have done videos on this before, but I'm always constantly updating you on the information that I learn, because that's just how it is. I learned something new and I want to share it with you so you can hopefully prevent the same problems that I was having beforehand. If you did enjoy this video, don't forget to smash that like button. I really appreciate it. Also, you can catch me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Facebook is my everyday thingy. I post videos, shorts, memes, thoughts in my head. Instagram is some short reels, and also TikTok is my sobriety and ADHD learning all about it, and also me deep diving into psychology, because that is what I'm going to college for this fall, to become a counselor. Until the next episode, you guys, where you and me both are going to be growing our happiness one plant at a time, one day at a time. I'll check y'all later in the next episode. Peace and love.